Hello, it is another Tuesday, which means it's time for another in real life video. And this week, we are not taking a general viewer submitted question, as we often do, but do not let that deter you. If you would like, feel free to, of course, submit your own general viewer submitted question, or something like asking for me to rank something silly, right? Feel free to do it. It will get added to our ever-growing, and not this week shrinking, list that I've got going in the background somewhere around in the cloud. Anyway, this one is kind of inspired by what we covered last week, as well as just nebulously some other things we've talked about. And, you know, just it's kind of a topic that people bring up now and again when it comes to Elder Scrolls 6. And that is quite simply, should and will Elder Scrolls 6 have a voiced protagonist? Immediately, right, just from the get-go, short version, I don't think it will, right? I don't think it will. Should it? I don't think it should. Right, there you go. Question answered. Video done. Man, let's go. Oh my gosh, I don't know if you can hear that. It is thundering pretty loud here right now. But let's just bang out another one. Let's bang out a 2-hour-long ranking video where I rank pants in Morrowind. Anyway. To go more in depth here. Reason why I don't think Elder Scrolls 6 will have a voice protagonist is predominantly because you would just need a lot of voice work done that is mostly redundant, and the vast majority of players will never hear, right? You would need, at minimum, a femme and mask voiceover for every single playable race in the game, right? Which I don't see them in any situation limiting the amount of playable races from what we're accustomed to. So you would need thus every single voice line voiced by whoever. I would assume like one of your mainstay voice cast members, right? Which they've done in the past for like the grunts and all of that. But, you know, just doing like pain grunts and all of that and like exertion, like stuff like that, it's very different from, you know, going through and actually being like, yeah, what do you have to trade? Oh, I'd like to buy something here. You know, I feel like that's a lot less of an ask, and you can repurpose a lot of those combat grunts and stuff throughout other parts of the game, right? You could have your NPCs do that, you know? Like, you know, case in point in Oblivion Remastered, which we're playing, although, you know, I'm playing a Dunmer man, the same person who voices the, like, grunts of pain and stuff is, oh my gosh, I forget his name, but he's the guy who voices the Creamy Man, and is predominantly, in the remaster, voicing all of the Altmer men, right? In that sense, you get away with it. I feel like nobody really minds in that sense whatsoever, so it's no big deal. The other big reason why I don't think they'll go that route is because they didn't do it for Starfield, right? I do think that there was maybe some backlash for Fallout 4 having done it. Oh my gosh, is cracking outside. It is really going wild. I was thinking I would maybe record another video after this. I don't know if it's getting picked up in this mic. Probably not, but man, it is really loud. It sounds like Battlefield 6 outside right now. That's what it sounds like. The beta never left. I'm still in the beta, I think. But good Lord, nonetheless, I've been completely thrown off track here. Regardless, yeah, I think in Fallout 4, there was a pretty decent chunk of backlash, and I would actually argue I think it's undeserved, right? Maybe we'll talk about this in its own sort of standalone video at some point, right? Because it probably bears repeating in some form or another. But the quick version, the quick version of the Fallout 4 situation is I think that, like, if you're playing a character that already has like a pretty defined and static origin, which you are in Fallout 4, right? You have one of two options, and there's very little variation from there. Your character evolves and makes decisions in the game world and can proceed toward being like, oh, I'm more Brotherhood of Steel. I'm more into the Institute. I'm more into raider business. I'm a little deranged, right? You can have that. But no matter what, your origin of who you are and where you are in the world is always kind of the same, and there's no real reason for you to sound differently, right? I think it's fine, right? You're playing like a fixed character in a sense that can evolve to some degree, right? But no matter what, you're always the sole survivor, and you kind of have this fixed point of origin in the world, right? Canonically. This is similar to other role-playing games that have a voice protagonist, right? Like the very easy one to point to would be like Witcher 3, right? No matter what, you are Geralt of Rivia. You are voiced by Doug Cockle, right? Geralt has this, although you can sway Geralt with decisions depending on where you are in the world and how you're feeling about what he would do, no matter what, all of those choices are somewhat in character for Geralt, right? There's some feasible way in which you could conceive like, okay, how would Geralt of Rivia get in this headspace, right? I think the same holds true for Fallout 4, and I think like the backlash over that game having a voice protagonist, given the way in which it starts, I think it's a little overblown, right? I think it's a little overblown. If you had more freedom over who you start as, right, then I would be more understanding of it. I'd be like, yeah, sure, no voice protagonist, because you could really be a whole lot of different people, right? But of Fallout games, Fallout 4, like I said, even for like 3 and New Vegas and 4, it's probably got the most well-defined origin for its character. You're not even just like, you're someone from Vault 76, or you could go back, you're someone from Vault 13. What kind of person are you from this vault, right? No, you are specifically either this guy or this lady, right? You are one of those two people who live in this neighborhood, and you even have like your past a little bit defined for you, right? In that sense, I think it's fine. I think you just map it onto other sorts of like role-playing games that have a voice protagonist, right? Like I said, Witcher. But in the case of something like Elder Scrolls, I really don't see them sort of forsaking their mission goal, as in their goal that has been the case for Elder Scrolls, and was even name dropped in like one of the original Morrowind trailers, to live another life, live in another world, live another life. I forget exactly what it was these days, but Todd Howard himself goes on to say that, and sort of that degree of escapism and sort of choosing, granted, you are always a prisoner, but what were you imprisoned for? Was it, were you rightly imprisoned? Were you wrongly imprisoned? Were you just in the wrong place at the wrong time and you got swept up into all this stuff for whatever reason, right? You have a lot more freedom for your point of origin, right? Let alone the fact that Elder Scrolls is sort of a fantasy world where if you meet a Nord, 90% of the time they're going to sound like what you would expect, right? Probably even higher, probably 98% of the time. It's very rare for Elder Scrolls, and this is probably like a decent critique to make of Elder Scrolls, is that, you know, if you're a Dunmer who has lived nearly your entire life in Skyrim among Nords, you would expect that Dunmer to talk and sound a lot like a Nord, right? You would expect that Dunmer, sure, they look Dunmerry, but as soon as they open their damn mouth, you would expect them to sound a certain way. Same goes for the inverse, right? If you're a Nord who has lived their entire life on Vardenfell, you would expect maybe you would have that same like iconic raspy voice, right? The way in which you speak is, it's more indicative of your culture, right? Where you were like raised, where you've lived the majority of your life. There's plenty of other role-playing games that nail this, right? One of my favorites is Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, where sure, there's a plethora of different races that have like very wildly different appearances and stuff, and even have their own like root cultures in the world, but you could be someone of another race and live in like that place, and you could come to talk like them or whatever, right? You would take on those sorts of mannerisms and ways of speech, because it's a lot more mindful of like these people's cultures, right? Which, although Elder Scrolls does have a lot of fanfare for that, there's very little in the way of like mixing it, right? At least in more realistic ways, right? But nonetheless, that's a big part of why I don't think they'll have a voice protagonist for Elder Scrolls 6, is because you would just need to put in so much work to have it to where it's like, okay, well, all of our Khajiit are going to sound like what you would expect a Khajiit to sound like based on past games, right? All of our Nords are going to sound like they're all from Skyrim, right? You would have such and such many permutations. It would just be a lot of work that the vast majority of your player base isn't going to hear, right? Better to have all of that instead conferred to voice lines that you can interact with and you can hear within your playthrough, right? At least I would reckon. Anyway, that also kind of, I think, dovetails into why I don't think it should, right? Because of the sort of freeform nature of making your character, of not having a specified point of origin, I don't think it ought to. Like I'd said, I feel like I have a decent point, I have a decent case to make for why it makes a lot of sense why Fallout 4 did have an origin, like a voice protagonist, because of that specified origin. I do think you could levy a criticism that it shouldn't have had such a well-defined point of origin for its protagonist, right? I think that's a better critique to levy at Fallout 4 than it should or shouldn't have a voice protagonist, right? I think better to levy the critique that you should have more freedom with where you want to play and who you want to be, right? You shouldn't have to be the sole survivor who either has a degree in law or is a military veteran and is currently living in Sanctuary Hills in Boston, Massachusetts, I think you can make a critique about that, and I feel like that's very valid. But like I said, since you are so well defined, it's like you're a John Shepard, right? You're Shepard Mass Effect, right? You're Geralt of Rivia, sort of same situation. What I do find fascinating, sort of, this is a bit of an aside. I do find fascinating, and I think this is due to some of the backlash that I'll say, like I said, I think it's a little unjustified that they got for Fallout 4's voice protagonist. I'm surprised that Starfield didn't have a voiced protagonist. I think that for very similar reasons, because everybody in that game is human, I feel like you could have gotten away with it. And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, thinking back now on it, at a certain point in development, they did have voice protagonists, right? They even recorded a whole bunch of lines, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that Starfield, at some point in development, had a whole bunch of lines voiced for their protagonists. It was specifically, what's his name? What's his real life name? It's not Adam Jensen, but the guy who voices Sam Coe. Oh my gosh, Elias Toufexis. For the masculine player, he would voice all of your lines and stuff. And I think it was it the person who voices Andrasia in Starfield that would have done like all the femme voices and stuff? I think so. Don't quote me on that. I definitely know for Elias Toufexis that was the case. But yeah, that's another situation where I think you could have very easily gotten away with it because there's such a similarity in, without spoiling too much, Starfield definitely touches on like shared humanity in a way, right? Shared humanity and like a lot of like people having more in common than you might think. Right? without going so far as to spoil much. But humanity is like a big theme there, right? And in that sense, I think you could have gone away with it, and I think it would have been totally fine. But like I said, I think they backpedaled on it because of sort of the response to Fallout 4, which in and of itself I think is unjustified. I think if you want to levy a critique against Fallout 4 in that way, like I said, have it be about the fixed point of origin for the protagonist, But all of that is neither here nor there. That is just to back up my reasoning and my thinking for Elder Scrolls 6. It would just be a pain in the butt to get all those lines recorded for all those different permutations of like what type of character you could be. And because I don't think they'll homogenize your character in Elder Scrolls 6. That would be absolutely buck wild if they were just like, well, no, every Elder Scrolls 6 prisoner bound by prophecy sounds and talks this way. That would be a wild change for them to make. I don't think it's gonna happen. I don't think that's gonna happen. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. This is always something that I've thought a fair amount about, especially with regards to, like I said, and like we were talking about just last week in last week's IRL video, Fallout 4, right? Something that I see crop up every now and again. But if you're not a fan of voice protagonists in your role-playing game, I think there's no reason to be worried about this for Elder Scrolls 6. Maybe if they pulled a fast one, it was like, yeah, you're this very specific character. Also, you can't be an Argonian this time, right? But I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't think that's gonna happen. That is possible, but I really don't think that's gonna happen. Anyway, that'll do it for this week. Also this week we've got coming up our first start of the, what do you call it, Planescape Torment playthrough. Hopefully should be tomorrow evening sometime. Should get that up and going, right? Look forward to it if you're one of the CRPG freaks like me, speaking of voice protagonists and whatnot. Anyway, that'll do it. Until next time, please take care of each other.